somewhere near the top of the world, there's a town where the sun vanishes for 4 months straight, where you can't walk past the last house without a rifle over your shoulder, where the ground is frozen so hard that for more than 70 years, no one new has been buried here. There are more polar bears in this corner of the Arctic than there are people. And still, more than 2,000 of them, from over 60 countries, call this frozen place home. In a few minutes, we'll take you inside a vault, drilled deep into a mountain built to survive the end of the world. We'll walk you through a Soviet ghost town frozen exactly as its people left it. But first, the reveal. This is Svalbard, so grab something warm and settle in, because we're taking you to the last town before the North Pole. Let's start with where we actually are, because it's hard to believe until you see it on a map. Svalbard is an archipelago, a scatter of islands, sitting in the Arctic Ocean about halfway between the northern tip of mainland Norway and the North Pole itself. Altogether, the islands cover an area about the size of West Virginia, and roughly 60% of that is buried under glaciers. The largest island is called Spitsbergen, and that's where almost everyone lives. The main town, our home base for this whole film, is Longyearbyen. Longyearbyen sits at nearly 78 degrees north. Let that number sink in for a second. That's farther north than the northernmost point of mainland Alaska. It's farther north than almost anywhere people permanently live on Earth. From here, it's about 1,300 kilometers to the North Pole and more than 2,000 kilometers back down to Oslo, the capital of the country that owns these islands. Read that again. This town is closer to the top of the planet than it is to its own capital. You get here by air, a flight of about 3 hours from Oslo, out over open ocean, until black mountains rise out of the white. And that's the first thing that hits you. There are no trees, none at all. It's too far north, too cold for a forest to grow. Just bare rock, ice, glaciers spilling down between the peaks, and a small town of colored houses tucked at the foot of it all. It should be one of the coldest inhabited spots on the map, and it's brutally cold in winter. But there's a twist. A tail end of the Gulf Stream, the same warm current that reaches all the way from the Gulf of Mexico, brushes this coast and keeps it milder than almost anywhere else this far north. It's the warmest place on Earth at such a high latitude, which is a strange thing to say about a town where the sea can freeze. The land itself is all long fjords and sharp, black peaks carved by ice over thousands of years. In summer, you can take a boat out and watch a glacier meet the sea, a wall of blue ice taller than a building. And every so often, a chunk the size of a house cracks off and crashes into the water, with a boom you feel in your chest. This is raw, unfinished country. It looks less like somewhere people live and more like the world before people arrived. Before we go any further, we're curious. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what the weather's doing outside your window right now. Because wherever you are, it's a long way from here. Now, here's the part that reframes everything, and it's our favorite fact about this place. There is no native people of Svalbard. Nobody's ancestors were born on this ice. There's no old language here, no tribe, no first family that goes back 1,000 years. And the reason is simple. Until people found something worth taking from these mountains, nobody lived here at all. For a couple of centuries, ships came in summer to hunt whales and walrus, and then sailed home before the ice closed in. It was a place you visited and left. Nobody stayed. For a long time, these islands belonged to no country at all. A genuine no man's land at the top of the map, used freely by the Dutch, the British, the Norwegians, the Russians, and anyone else brave or desperate enough to sail this far. What changed everything was coal. In the early 1900s, an American businessman named John Monroe Longyear came north, saw the coal seams running through these mountains, and built a mining operation to pull them out. The town grew up around his mine, Longyear City. Over time, the Norwegian spelling took over and it became Longyearbyen, but the name is still his. A frozen Norwegian town at the edge of the Arctic, carrying the name of a man from Michigan. For most of the last century, this was a company town in the truest sense. The mining company owned the buildings, ran the shop, controlled the town, and coal was the only reason anyone was here. The Norwegian company Store Norsk took over the operation, and for decade after decade, the rhythm of Longyearbyen was the rhythm of the mine. It was hard, dark, dangerous work. And it was so central to life that even a world war reached up here to touch it. In 1943, in the thick of the Second World War, German warships shelled and burned Longyearbyen to deny its coal to the enemy. The town you see today was largely rebuilt after that. So how does a place with no native population, built by a single industry, end up holding people from more than 60 different countries? For that, you need to know about one remarkable document. On the 9th of February, 1920, a group of nations signed what's now called the Svalbard Treaty. It handed Norway's sovereignty over the islands, but it came with an unusual condition. Every country that signed was given an equal right to live here and to work here, and to dig for its resources. The islands were also to stay demilitarized, never turned into a military base by anyone. And those terms have largely held ever since, more than 100 years later. It's part of why this remote scatter of rock is considered one of the most stable, protected corners on Earth, which, as you'll see, is exactly why the world chose to hide its most precious backups here. What that means in practice is astonishing. You don't need a visa to move to Svalbard. A worker from Thailand, a scientist from Italy, a chef from the Philippines, a student from Norway, all of them can simply come and stay and build a life. That's why a town of roughly 2,500 people speaks in dozens of languages, and why the school runs classes for kids from all over the map. It might be one of the most international little communities on the entire planet, out here where you'd least expect it. If you're finding this as fascinating as we are, a quick tap on the like button really does help us keep making these. Thank you. Let's talk about the light, because nothing prepares you for it. Svalbard has 2 seasons that most of us will never experience. For about 4 months, from late October to the middle of February, the sun simply does not rise. It stays below the horizon the whole time, and the town lives in a long blue dusk that slides into full dark. That's the polar night, and it lasts longer than an entire school semester spent without daylight. It isn't pitch black the whole time. There's a long stretch of deep blue twilight around the edges, and on the clear nights the northern lights come out and pour green and violet across the sky, sometimes during what should be the afternoon. People here learn to live by lamplight and headlamp. They string fairy lights in every window, they light candles at midday, and find a strange comfort in the quiet. There's a whole culture built around getting through the dark together, and people who've lived here will tell you they come to love it. The stillness of a world lit only by the moon on the snow. The northern lights are the reward. On a good night, the whole sky comes alive, curtains of green and pink rippling and shifting overhead, while you stand in the cold with your breath fogging in front of you. Down south, people fly thousands of miles and pay a fortune for one clear glimpse of that. Up here, it's just the sky doing its thing on a Tuesday. The dark asks a lot of you, but it hands you something back that almost nowhere else on Earth can. And then slowly, the sun comes back, and when it flips all the way. From late April to late August, the opposite happens. The sun never sets. It just circles the sky, around and around, day and night, for 4 solid months. This is the midnight sun. People hike at 2 in the morning. Kids play outside at hours that would be unthinkable anywhere else. Flowers bloom, the tundra turns green, and the whole town seems to run on a kind of endless golden energy. You lose all sense of time, and you sleep with thick, blackout curtains pulled tight, because outside, it's forever noon. To live here is to spend half your year in darkness and half of it in light that never quits. So what's an ordinary day actually like in a town like this? Warmer and more normal than you'd think, honestly. Longyearbyen is a real town. It has a supermarket, a handful of restaurants, a hospital, a sports hall, and a university center called UNIS, where students come from around the world to study Arctic science and sit exams with rifles stored by the door. There's a church, painted and warm, and a brewery that sits up here as the northernmost brewery on the planet. People work office jobs, and teaching jobs, and guiding jobs. They meet for coffee, there are knitting clubs, and film nights, and taco nights. Because it sits so far north, Longyearbyen collects a whole string of world's northernmost titles, almost by accident. The northernmost church, the northernmost brewery, the northernmost supermarket, the northernmost cash machine, the northernmost of nearly everything you can name. It's a running joke here, and it's also just the truth of being the last real town before the ice takes over completely. But the details are wonderful. The houses are small and wooden, and they're painted in bold blocks of color, red and mustard yellow and deep blue and green. Because when the world around you is black rock and white snow for most of the year, color is something you fight for. Those glowing colored windows against the dark mountains are the image of this place. Then there's the shoes. All over town, in shops, in offices, even in the hospital, you take your shoes off at the door. It's a habit left over from the coal mining days when miners came in filthy with black dust and simply couldn't track it inside. The coal is mostly gone now, but the ritual stayed, and most buildings still have a wall of boot racks at the entrance. And instead of cars in the driveway, there are snowmobiles. Rows and rows of them parked outside homes the way pickup trucks sit in an American driveway. For a good part of the year, the snowmobile is how you get around, how you visit a friend, how you leave town at all, because the roads simply end at the edge of the settlement. They outnumber the people who live here. And yes, families really do live here, and children really do grow up in this. There are kids who learn to read in the polar night, who think it's completely normal to spot a warning sign for polar bears on the walk to school, who play in the endless summer light until someone finally makes them come inside. For them, this frozen scrap of the Arctic is just normal. It's the only childhood they've ever known, and they wouldn't trade it. A couple of other small things you'd notice fast. There are no cats. They're banned because a house cat would hunt the seabirds that nest here, and out here at the far edge of everything, the birds get the protection. And for all the snow and ice, this is technically a desert, one of the driest places imaginable. The air is so dry that fire is a real danger, and a house fire up here, far from any real help, is one of the things people worry about most. Now we need to talk about the neighbors, because they change everything about how you live. Polar bears. In the wider Barents Sea region that these islands belong to, there are somewhere around 3,000 of them, which is more than the number of people who live in Svalbard. Now, we want to be straight with you, because this is where the internet loves to stretch the truth. Those bears range across an enormous area of sea ice and Russian territory, not just these islands. Scientists who actually counted found only a few hundred physically on Svalbard itself at the time of the survey, with hundreds more out on the sea ice to the north and well over 1,000 across the Russian Arctic to the east. And as the sea ice shrinks with a warming climate, the bears that call these islands home are becoming more cut off from the others, stranded on a smaller and smaller stage. But here's what matters. They are not in a zoo, they are not in a reserve, they roam free across this whole frozen land, and a big male can weigh close to 1,000 pounds and fear absolutely nothing. Hunting them has been banned here since 1973, and they've been left to rule the ice ever since. So there's a rule, and it shapes daily life more than any other. By law, you're not allowed to travel outside the settlement without a way to protect yourself from a bear. In practice, that means a rifle. Residents sling one over a shoulder to head out onto the land the way you or I might grab an umbrella before leaving the house. Guides carry them. New students at the university get trained on how to fire one before they're allowed out onto the land. It's said there are roughly twice as many firearms in this little town as there are residents, and almost none of it has anything to do with crime. It's all about the bear. There's an old local joke that you can carry a camera or a rifle, because if you've only got the camera, that's the day you'll actually meet a bear. It's dark humor, but it comes from a real place. People have died out here. In 2011, a bear attacked a group of young campers outside town and killed a teenager. In 2020, a man was killed at a campsite near the edge of Longyearbyen, and that danger is still very real. People here live alongside it every single day, and nearly everyone has a close call story of their own. Here's the nuance most clips get wrong, though. Inside Longyearbyen itself, you don't walk around armed. Carrying a loaded firearm in town is actually forbidden. Rifles have to be carried empty, in plain view, and you can't bring one into a shop or a public building. Out here, a rifle is just a tool for one specific danger, the one that begins the moment the last house is behind you. You'll see the warning signs right at the edge of town, a black bear silhouette on a yellow sign. And past this point, the rules change and the land belongs to something else. Now, some of the strangest facts about this place, and we really want to get them exactly right, because they get twisted around online constantly. You've probably heard that it's illegal to die in Svalbard. That's not quite true, and the real story is stranger and sadder than the myth. Here's what's actually going on. The town's cemetery stopped accepting new burials around 1950, and the reason is the ground itself. Everything here is built on permafrost, soil that stays frozen solid all year round. When you bury a body in permafrost, it doesn't break down the way it would in warmer earth. Instead, it stays preserved, more or less frozen in place. And that turned out to be a genuine problem, because a number of the bodies in the old cemetery came from the Great Flu pandemic of 1918. And when scientists studied them decades later, traces of that century-old virus were still intact in the frozen tissue. So the cemetery was effectively closed to new graves. It was never really about a law against dying. The truth is simpler and stranger than that. The frozen ground here will not let the dead break down and rest the way they do everywhere else. So the town simply stopped adding new graves. So what happens when someone here is very sick or very old? Gently, and well before the end, they're usually flown down to the mainland, because the small hospital in Longyearbyen isn't built for long-term end-of-life care. In fact, many residents keep an address back on the mainland for exactly these reasons. The big moments of a life that this town isn't equipped to hold. And the same logic runs in the other direction. Right at the start of life, this isn't really a place you're meant to be born either. Expectant mothers typically travel down to mainland Norway a few weeks before their due date, because the hospital here isn't set up for delivering babies. Think about what that really means. In this town, you can build a full and happy life, but you're gently encouraged not to be born here and not to die here. You come here to live. Which brings us to the vault, because it might be the single most extraordinary thing this far north. Just outside Longyearbyen, drilled straight into the side of a frozen mountain, there's a doorway that looks like something out of a film. A thin, concrete wedge glowing faintly against the snow. This is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, and it opened in 2008. Behind that door, down a long tunnel, and deep inside the permafrost, sit shelves holding more than 1.2 million samples of seeds, sent here from almost every country on Earth. Rice, wheat, beans, potatoes, crops you've never heard of from farms half a world away. It's a backup copy of the food that keeps humanity alive. Think of it as a Noah's Ark for crops, or a backup drive for the whole planet's agriculture. The idea is simple and sobering. If a war, or a disaster, or a disease ever wipes out a crop somewhere in the world, that country can come here to this frozen mountain and get its seeds back. The vault can hold up to 4.5 million samples in all, kept at 18 degrees below zero, and it sits well above sea level and deep in rock so it survives whatever the world does outside. The permafrost keeps everything naturally frozen even if the power fails. The seeds arrive sealed in foil packets sent in from over 100 gene banks around the globe, and the countries that deposit them still own them. Svalbard is just the safe deposit box. Nobody can walk in and take another nation's seeds. Twice a year or so, there's a quiet ceremony as new boxes are carried down into the cold and set on the shelves, and the collection keeps growing. Just this year, new deposits arrived, including the very first seeds sent from a couple of countries that had never contributed before, and of all things, the vault's first olive seeds. Farmers and nations keep trusting this cold mountain with their future. There's something moving about it. Honestly, a single frozen room high in the Arctic, holding the promise that whatever happens down here, we could plant it all again. And it isn't the only vault in that mountainside. A short distance away, tucked into an old coal mine, there's a second one you've probably never heard of, called the Arctic World Archive. It opened in 2017, and instead of seeds, it stores data written onto special film built to last for centuries without any power at all. The Vatican Library is in there. National archives from Mexico and Brazil are in there. And so is a complete snapshot of the world's open source computer code, sent up by the software platform GitHub and buried in the ice for whoever might need it someday. Two vaults side by side near the roof of the planet. One protects the crops that feed us. The other protects our records, our memory, our code, both waiting quietly in the dark in case we ever have to start again. If you're enjoying this trip to the edge of the map, take a second to subscribe and come with us to the next place we explore. It genuinely means the world. Now let's go see the ghost towns, because Longyearbyen isn't the only settlement out here. Take a boat across the fjord and you reach Barentsburg, a Russian coal town that's still working to this day. It's a small, tough community of a few hundred people, run by a Russian state mining company, with Soviet-era murals still bright on the walls and an old Soviet monument watching over the square. The Soviet Union bought the settlement back in the 1930s, using that same treaty right to mine coal, and its successor has held on to it ever since. Coal mining wound down on the Norwegian side, but here it carries on, a little piece of another world sitting on Norwegian soil, reachable only by boat or snowmobile. Walk its streets and you'll find surveillance signs, a monument or two, and a canteen serving borscht, a strange fold in the map where the old Soviet Arctic still quietly breathes. And then there's Pyramiden, and this one will stay with you. Pyramiden was a Soviet mining town too, named after the pyramid-shaped mountain that looms above it. At its peak, more than 1,000 people lived here, and the Soviet Union poured money into it to make it a showpiece of what life under communism could be. It had a swimming pool, a concert hall, a library, a grand piano, even a patch of green lawn grown from soil shipped in all the way from the mainland, because nothing grows in this frozen ground on its own. And then it fell apart. In 1996, a plane carrying people connected to these Russian settlements crashed on its approach to Svalbard, killing everyone on board, over 140 people. It tore a hole right through this tiny community. 2 years later, in 1998, the mine closed and Pyramiden was abandoned. Over a matter of months, everyone packed up and left. What they left behind is a town frozen in time. The buildings still stand. Sheet music still sits on that piano. Bottles still line the shelves of the canteen, and children's drawings still hang in the old school. And in the main square, gazing out over the empty streets and the glacier beyond, stands a bust of Vladimir Lenin, the northernmost statue of him anywhere on Earth. The clock on the Culture House has stopped. A mosaic of a bright northern sun still shines on one wall, while the paint peels around it. The cold has kept it all almost perfectly preserved, so you can walk through a Soviet dream that simply stopped one day and never started again. It's beautiful and unsettling in the same breath, the closest thing to time travel you're likely to find. Out where the wind is the only sound, and a polar bear might wander through the empty square. Today, a handful of caretakers and guides keep the place alive through the summer, and you can visit by boat from Longyearbyen and stand in the quiet and feel the years hanging in the air around you. Let's come back to town and talk about something warmer. Food, and how you actually feed a community up here, and why the meals matter so much more than they would anywhere else. Almost nothing grows on Svalbard, so almost everything has to come from somewhere else. A supply ship arrives every week or so with the big deliveries, then carries the garbage back out. Flights bring fresh food in on an almost daily basis. And yet, against all odds, the food here is surprisingly global and surprisingly good. This tiny town at the end of everything has proper restaurants and cooking from all over the world, because its people come from all over the world. A meal here has traveled a very long way to reach your plate, and you feel it. But the food is really about something deeper, and you feel it most in winter. When the dark settles in for months, people don't drift apart up here. They pull together. There are shared dinners and festivals and clubs, and quiet traditions built entirely around getting through the long night as a community. And every spring, when the sun finally lifts back over the mountains for the first time in months, the whole town turns out to greet it. There's a celebration for the returning sun, the way other places mark a holiday. People gather, faces turned up toward the first real light in months, and welcome it home. When you spend half the year in the dark, the returning sun is worth a party. So they throw one. Now, we've saved something important for near the end, and we're going to tell it to you straight, calmly, because it's true and it matters. Svalbard is changing fast. This is one of the fastest warming places on the entire planet. It's heating up several times quicker than the global average, and average temperatures here have climbed by something like 5 to 7 degrees Celsius since the 1970s. In the summer of 2020, the town recorded a temperature of 21.7 degrees Celsius, which up here is almost unimaginable. And that warming is doing real physical things to this real place. The permafrost, the frozen ground the whole town is built on, is starting to thaw. And when the ground that holds up your houses, your roads, and your airport begins to soften, everything gets harder and more expensive. Rain now falls in winter where there used to be only snow. Glaciers are pulling back, and the mountains have grown more dangerous. In 2015, an avalanche swept down off the slope above town and into a row of homes in Longyearbyen, killing 2 people and destroying several houses. It was a shock the town is still living with, and it changed how and where people are allowed to build. Some neighborhoods have been emptied and torn down because they're no longer considered safe. The old certainties about what the mountain would and wouldn't do are gone. Even the mines felt it near the end. The last working coal mine had to shut for days at one point when meltwater from the warming mountain flooded in, the very ground the industry depended on turning against it. And the coal that built this town is winding down for good now. The coal-fired power plant that heated and powered Longyearbyen for generations was switched off a few years back, and the last Norwegian coal mine on Svalbard shut down for good in 2026, sealing the tunnel and closing more than a century of mining here. The town that Cole created now lives on tourism and science instead. And in maybe the sharpest irony of all, even the Seed Vault, that fortress built to survive the end of the world, has felt the change. Back in the winter of 2016 into 2017, unusually warm weather thawed some of the permafrost around the entrance, and meltwater seeped into the access tunnel. Now, it froze before it ever reached the seas, and the collection was never in danger. The vault's own cold did its job, but it was a quiet warning. The one place built to outlast catastrophe had taken on water from the very thing it was meant to be immune to. Norway went back in, waterproofed the tunnel, and dug channels to steer meltwater away. And the vault stands secure today. Still, nobody up here missed the message. We tell you all of this not to frighten you, but because it's the honest truth of the place right now. The people who live here aren't panicking. They're adapting, the way people at the edge of the world always have. They're building new houses on sturdier ground, putting up avalanche barriers on the slopes above town, tearing down what can't be saved, and figuring out how to power a town at the edge of the Arctic without the coal that first built it. There's a stubbornness to this community, a refusal to just pack up and leave a place they've come to love. They're holding on, with clear eyes about what's coming for it, and a quiet determination to still be here on the other side. Before we close, a few honest, practical notes. In case Svalbard has crept under your skin the way it has ours. You reach it by air, flying in through Longyearbyen, and the town itself is open, safe, and welcoming. If you want the polar night and the northern lights, come in the deep winter and bring more warm layers than you think you could ever need. If you want the midnight sun and the green valleys and the boat trips, come in high summer. But know this one thing: you cannot simply wander off into the wild on your own out here. The moment you leave the settlement, you're in bear country, and it's serious. The responsible way to see the land is with a licensed local guide, someone who carries the protection and knows the ground and the ice. And the silence out here is a thing all its own, away from the hum of the town, with no traffic, no trees, no birdsong in winter. It gets so quiet you can hear your own pulse. People describe stepping off the plane and feeling the Arctic hit them all at once. The cold, the light, the sheer scale of the emptiness, and something in them going still. A trip here is short, and honestly a little expensive, and it feels precious in a way that's hard to explain until you've stood in that great white silence yourself, tiny under those black mountains at the very edge of where people go. So here's what stays with us about Svalbard. It's a place with no native sons and no native daughters. Nobody is truly from here. Everyone, in a sense, is only passing through. And yet, people come and they stay for years. They raise the sun back into the sky each spring. They guard the world's seeds and the world's memory in the side of a frozen mountain. They take their boots off at the door and sling a rifle over a shoulder and fall a little in love with the dark. They build a warm, colorful, stubborn little home in a place that should be impossible. And maybe that's the quiet lesson of this town at the top of the world. Home isn't only the place you were born. Sometimes it's the place you choose. Thank you so much for making this journey with us, all the way to the last town before the North Pole. Or, as they'd say up here, Tusen tak. Now tell us in the comments, where in the world should we travel to next?